family, long in business and long in age, over 100.
Well, this was important to my husband, Elias Ayers.
Truly.
Yes.
Please come in, and members of the club, of course. Take a seat. Oh, isn't it nice to have someone die under a shade tree?
Don't know that we planned it that way, but it worked out. Please sit down. Be comfortable. It is good to see everyone. My name is Marianne Lapsley, and I do not usually talk about myself. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. However, I was asked specifically to tell some of my reminiscences and something about myself, and I have agreed to do that. I suppose I come from a family that has always been interested in serving the community, in bettering the community where we lived. My grandfather, Gold Selick Silliman, was a graduate of Yale College, and he was attorney for the Crown in Fairfield, Connecticut in the 1770s. But then when we began our war for independence, he became a commander of our local militia and was soon promoted to Brigadier General. He was in a skirmish along with Brigadier General Benedict Arnold in 1779 over trying to protect some supplies for the Continental Army. In his own law practice, he became such a zealous prosecutor of local loyalists that they arranged to have him kidnapped and imprisoned. My father also, William, was imprisoned, but he was released because of ill health. Grandfather languished for about a year before my grandmother, Mary Fish Noyes Silliman, orchestrated his release. My father and mother and my sister and I came down here in 1813, and we actually settled in Louisville and stayed there for a time before mother and father decided to come over here to New Albany. In October of 1816, mother and father died within a week of one another of typhoid fever. I went back to Louisville to live with my sister, who by then had married the Reverend David Chapman Banks, and they were living in Mr. Cuthbert Bullitt's house in Louisville, and I went to stay there. I began to teach in the school that Mr. Banks had established just about the same time that he got to Louisville. I remember the summons from Mrs. Lucy Clark Cron requesting that Mr. Banks go out to Locust Grove to conduct the funeral services for Mrs. Cron's brother, the redoubtable General George Rogers Clark. The old gentleman passed in February of 1818. It was a raw winter day when the funeral services were conducted. It was a much happier day in July of 1819 when Mr. Banks officiated again. That was when Mr. Elias Ayers and I married in the Cuthbert Bullitt home and began our life together. We stayed in Louisville, and amongst other things, we had the honor of helping to establish the First Presbyterian Church in Louisville, and Mr. Banks, of course, officiating. We also, Mr. Ayers' business prospered. He was very much an entrepreneur, always looking for a business opportunity. His primary concern was dry goods and mercantile, but he was always open to the possibility of expanding business and of helping other people to establish and expand businesses. By 1821, he had decided that we would come over here to New Albany. We bought some property at the corner of Main and Pearl Streets. Our mercantile was on the first floor, and we lived above that. We continued to acquire property, and Mr. Ayers continued to help other entrepreneurs to establish their businesses. He supplemented the salaries of all clergymen in New Albany, not just Presbyterians, but he believed that to do a proper job as a minister, the man must earn enough money that he could be available to help people in his congregation. And so he saw to it that everybody had a living salary. We had the honor again to help establish the First Presbyterian Church here in New Albany, and Mr. Banks came over to officiate for the first communion service there. I helped to found one of the first Sunday schools in New Albany, and I did found the first female Bible study group and the first female prayer meeting group. I am still active with those organizations and take great pleasure in participating in that. Over the course of a decade, almost 2 decades, Mr. Ayers and I were blessed with 8 children. But over the course of a decade, we buried all of them, each with their own Bible verse carved on their headstones. Our daughter Mary was 19. She was a beautiful young woman, and we allowed ourselves to hope that perhaps there might be grandchildren in due course. Our son Edward was 15. We were so proud when he announced that he wished to study for the ministry. Mary left us in July of the year of 1839, and her brother followed in December of that same year. Mr. Ayers set aside $20,000 to establish the New Albany Theological Seminary as a tribute and a memorial to our son. But Mr. Ayers died before the school was well on its way, and so I took over to conclude that establishment. After a couple of years, I did marry with Reverend Lindsley. He had been for 25 years chancellor at the University of Nashville. I went down there to help him close out his tenure there and see that his successor was well established, and then we came up here and we taught and administered the seminary for the next 6 years or so. He passed away. Then I married Mr. William Richardson. He was president of the Bank of Northern Kentucky, which was headquartered in Louisville. After his passing, I was alone for another couple of years, and then I married Mr. Lapsley, Doctor of Divinity. Again, we taught and administered at the Theological Seminary, and we continued to administer other bequests. In addition to the seminary, Mr. Ayers had provided an $18,000 bequest to the theological department at Hanover College. There were numerous other bequests to churches and schools and civic organizations to be sure that they had enough money to continue to operate and to help people in the community. I viewed my job as administering those and being sure that that money continues to be available and to grow and help to fund these organizations that we had helped and endowed. I also am looking for entrepreneurs who wish to establish businesses or who wish to expand their businesses. They must present a solid business plan, and they must demonstrate enough common sense and determination that they will succeed in their business ventures. As Mr. Ayers and I did, I continue to look for young scholars who need an assist with paying for their education. I don't mind this a bit because we know that they will make great contributions to the community as they go along then. I did found the woolen mill in New Albany. I regard that as a great accomplishment, or at least a good accomplishment, because it has furnished jobs and prosperity for a number of people here in the city and continues to be a source of income and prestige for the city. I am asked if I have any plans to remarry. I have no plans. But if the Lord chooses to send me another good, strong Christian gentleman, I certainly have no aversion to sharing my life with him. I have buried 4 husbands, 8 children, my parents, my sister, her children. Sometimes people ask me how a loving father can be so cruel. I do not view it as such. All of my loved ones are with the Lord. Their salvation is assured. And I like to think that mine is as well. I will rejoin them. I will be with them. And as for now, I am chosen to remain on the Pilgrim Church here on earth, and I will continue to discharge my duties to the best of my ability. My job is to oversee, to take care of, to superintend, and I will be as good a steward as I possibly can be for as long as the Lord chooses to have me to remain here. I thank you very much for visiting with me this evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here.
Thank you. And if I may trouble you just a moment, I would like for the ladies to admire your lovely gown.
Beautiful, beautiful.
We have had quite a variety and still yet to come of attires and apparels. Miss Rockenbach, as she had retired in 1963, you might notice she was daring enough to wear pants in public, no less. Now, you also saw a display of working attire for the kitchenware of a more practical, personal sense. We're going to see more and others, but for the moment, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's walk.